Hey y'all, these are games that had horrible launches and over time redeemed themselves enough to be considered good games. We're just going to start this list right away, starting with No Man's Sky. No Man's Sky in 2016 was probably the most anticipated game of the year. It was advertised as being like borderline infinite, with like 18 quintillion planets in it, which was and still is by far the largest map in any game. The main idea of the game was that you had an infinite amount of stuff to explore and you could just see all sorts of things because all the worlds were procedurally generated, so it would be unique and you wouldn't ideally see the same things and you could just keep exploring, finding new things, all that. Safe to say that the game's hype was like very high, and when the game came out, it was a major disappointment to the people who were so excited to play this game. Main criticisms included the game being really buggy, crashing a lot, having a really boring gameplay loop that people didn't enjoy, and the planets not even being interesting to explore in the first place, which kind of kills everything the game had going for it. Many of the things promised for the game were either absent or just not as good as expected. And this was all after multiple months of delays on the game. Fans were very mad with this game, and they absolutely bombed its reviews. It had over 200,000 players at launch, and it got like horrible reviews. Soon after this, the game was abandoned by most of the players. The developers, though, Hello Games, did not give up. They fixed all the bugs that were causing major issues at launch. They added a lot of gameplay mechanics to keep the game more fun and interesting. They added multiplayer. They added multiple game modes. They added a ton of stuff to the game. Eventually, people started taking notice that the game started looking like really good. So they were like, okay, let's try this out and see how it is. People came back to a brand new game almost, like with all the free DLC. By the way, like all that stuff I talked about them adding was free for people who own the game. They came back to see all this free DLC, and it was like a completely new experience. Instead of taking the money they made at launch and running with it, they improved every aspect of this game to make something special, because they cared about this game. Even if the launch was horrible, they did care about this game. And now the common perception of this game is that it's good now, and that it's actually worth buying. Despite the fact that its launch was so bad and it will always be remembered for that part, they really did make something special with this and really show a good example of how to handle a horrible launch. Now my next entry on this list should need no introduction, Cyberpunk 2077. We've all heard this story before, we all lived through it. This game was supposed to be the greatest game of a generation, and it ended up being an absolute disaster. Then became good enough to get good reception and get a show based off of it. Let's go back to the beginning though. In May of 2012, Cyberpunk was first revealed with this famous trailer. After 7 years of hard work and patience, we finally got a release date announced, April 2020. Hype had not been higher for this game. People were so excited for it. CD Projekt Red already had a good reputation because of the quality of their games, especially The Witcher 3, which had just released in 2015. But this game was looked to be like the next step in gaming. But look, 7 years of waiting, it was finally about to arrive, and nothing's gonna stop this release. And then when all hopes were high, it got delayed to December. But people were still hype. They were like, okay, they're gonna take time, clean up the bugs, make sure this is a great game, and it's gonna be good. December rolls around, and the game actually comes out. After 8 years of waiting, people were finally going to be able to experience the greatest game of all time. People noticed, though, that something was very off about the game. It's like it was released unfinished after all these years of development, all these delays, and it still isn't finished. Rightfully, fans were absolutely furious about this game, and they constantly demanded refunds, enough so that Sony pulled it off the PSN store. And if you know Sony, they don't do stuff like that. They are greedy. They are not the type to refund games and remove it from their store. Quite literally everything about this game was broken though. Like every part of it had glitches. People's faces wouldn't mold. You could barely play the game on old gen consoles like the PS4. It was actually like almost impossible. The game would crash constantly. Like nothing worked. It's hard to list all the things that were broken because it's easier to list the stuff that did work. The only thing that did work was the refund button. And even then, they tried to make it hard to refund the game in the first place, which was just absolutely unreal for them to do after all this. This looks like one of those games that you can't recover from. It's so bad people are still to this day scared to play it, even though it's been fixed up. The way they recovered their reputation with this game is by fixing it. They fixed up the game, all the bugs, all the horrible performance issues. They added a cool little expansion to the game. They made an anime after people got really hyped for the game again. And now it's considered a pretty good game and is mostly what it's supposed to be in the first place. It really does make you wonder though, like, why did they even bother releasing this unfinished if they're just going to fix it later anyways? You know, you might as well delay it to the next holiday season or something like that. I don't know. It just seems weird to release this game unfinished and kill your reputation like that. Because I guarantee most people are going to be scared to pre-order any games from them again. But that is the beautiful story of Cyberpunk 2077. A story of tragedy and recovery, I guess. The next entry on this list really does hit home for me because I am a huge fan of the Battlefront series. And I'm talking about, I own the PS2 games and still play them to this day. Both of them. And I played the first Battlefront on PS4 and the second one on PS4 a ton. And while the 2015 entry in the series did have a pretty rough start and eventually became a little better, like with the expansions and stuff, I think the second one is the better example of a game redeeming itself from being horrible at launch. I'm sure we've all seen the famous Reddit comment showing the pride and accomplishment you get from unlocking a character after playing for 80 hours, or spending like $100 on loot boxes or credits. And while that comment, I think, represents the issue a majority of people had with it, with how awful the microtransactions were, or the grind you had to do to avoid the microtransactions, I think there were so many more issues that kind of got forgotten about because of how bad that was that need to be mentioned. Something people forget about the launch of the game was how bad the servers performed. Like, it was borderline unplayable for a lot of people. And most of the content was locked behind a stupid microtransaction system, which actually got removed. They removed the paid loot boxes, so you had to earn them in-game, which is actually insane that people made EA not be greedy. If only we could do that for Madden, that would be nice. But the game got quickly fixed up with the bugs and the server issues and all that, and then a constant stream of updates from DICE kept the game alive, and people really love this game, still to this day, despite support being dropped for the game. But this game really proved that people coming together can make stuff happen, and that's what happened with this game. They came together and were like, this game sucks, fix it, and then got fixed. I still remember though how scary Anakin was when he was still broken in the game. Some scary, horrific times. Couldn't do anything but accept your own death. The next one might sting some hearts because this game series is beloved by many, and its launch was so sad to see, man. And that is the Halo Master Chief Collection. The Bungie Halo games are some of the best games ever made, let alone FPS games ever made. And they were like crowning jewels of the genre for like over a decade. And 343 Industries came in, they made Halo 4, and Halo 4 it's fine, you know, but still, it still was liked by a lot of people. And when the Xbox One came out, people were wondering, how are they going to play Halo on the Xbox One when it comes out? In 2010, Halo CE Remastered came out, and people were wanting that same treatment for Halo 2 because it had not gotten a proper remaster on modern consoles. And as these games had been released from the original Xbox to the 360, when the next generation came, people were also wondering, like, what's the next step for Halo with this new company 343? On June 9th, 2014, the Halo MCC collection, the Master Chief Collection, was announced officially, and fans were so excited. They didn't have to dust off their old consoles anymore. You could just play every single game in one location. And in the collection came Halo 2 Anniversary, which was very exciting to see because the graphics on that were amazing. They still hold up today, 10 years later. But back then especially, it was like, oh my god. I remember seeing the cutscenes when the game came out, and I was genuinely not sure if it was live action people or if it was all CGI. And it turns out it was all CGI, which is absolutely insane. Because like, just look at this stuff on the screen. That looks insane. In November 2014, the Halo Master Chief Collection finally released. And unfortunately, upon release, like all the other games, it was a complete disaster. Let's start with the biggest issue. First of all, the matchmaking did not work at all. It was completely busted. People could not find matches in this game at all. There were a whole bunch of minor issues along with that, like bugged achievements and glitches in the campaigns. 343 would apologize for this and give the people who had played the game up to that point some free gifts. One of those gifts was the entire game Halo 3 ODST in the collection for free. And if you think that's bad, this is just the beginning of all the issues this collection's had. At launch, this game's multiplayer was completely broken, like I'd previously stated. There were a ton of updates in the next year to try making it better, and it did help a little bit, but there were still a ton of just unresolved issues with the multiplayer. The biggest issue found after matchmaking was fixed was that there would be unbalanced teams, so you'd get games that are like 1v7, 2v6, 5v3, stuff like that. And of course, achievements were still broken in the game, which was a big issue for Halo fans because they like to get their games done. They really like these games. That's why they bought a whole collection of them. But 343's next game, Halo 5, took up all their attention with the marketing, the release, and all their updates with that game. So it left the Halo MCC abandoned for 2 years. So yes, this game was broken for 2 years after it was supposed to be fixed. But when all hope seemed to be lost, in 2017 they finally announced that they were going to start fixing the game again. And they were actually locked into fixing it this time. At the end of 2018, they made a huge patch that fixed a ton of the issues that were still in the game. And then they announced Halo Reach come to the collection alongside the PC release of the Master Chief Collection. The game would continue to get patches and updates consistently until last year when they dropped support for the game. And now the game's been overrun by hackers. So this is one of those cases where a game redeems itself and then falls right back into the pit. Overall, this game was a huge project for 343, and they didn't get it right the first time. Straight up, they just didn't. And then they fixed it over time eventually. And then they eventually let it fall back to the wayside. That'll be the end of this video. There was a lot more I wanted to talk about, but I cut a lot of it just because of lack of knowledge on the games, or just because some of them just weren't interesting. Some of them were kind of repetitive from previous entries, so I just decided to just cut them out.